Since Season 1 of Warzone, there's always been some sort of meta. But every time the game gets updated, that meta seems to change over and over and over. Season after season, the cycle is always the same. A new gun gets added, it's ridiculously overpowered and becomes the new meta, and then it ultimately gets nerfed. Sometimes these nerfs make the gun completely useless, and sometimes they bring it to an actual balanced level. Now, throughout all of this, there seems to be a few guns that have stayed pretty consistently decent. Nothing special, but they'll still get the job done, and they aren't by any means bad. Now, while most balancing patches and updates tend to only target the problematic guns, whatever's in the meta, the Season 4 Reloaded update completely changed all of that. This update either buffed or nerfed pretty much every single gun in the game, effectively turning the entire meta on its head. Now, while a few guns have come to light as the true meta of Season 4, I wanted to take a look at every single gun in the game and see how they all stack up. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to go over all of that in one video, so this is going to be a recurring series with each episode taking a look at one particular class of weapon. So, without any further ado, here is my definitive Warzone Season 4 Reloaded Assault Rifles tier list, Part 1. First up on the list, we have the Pharah. Now, earlier in Season 4, before the Reloaded update, the Pharah was the meta. It had a fast fire rate, great damage range, excellent bullet velocity, virtually no recoil, and you could put 60-round mags on it. Basically, everything you could possibly want in an AR in one weapon. Now, obviously, with the Reloaded update heavily targeting the guns that were in the meta, the Pharah got hit pretty hard. In the patch notes for the update, it's listed that the Pharah's maximum damage was decreased from 31 to 29, and its recoil was also increased. Pre-nerf, I, like pretty much every other Warzone player out there, mained this thing as an AR and loved it. So, given how great it was before, did these changes really make that much of a difference? The short answer is yes. The gun definitely feels a lot shakier, which makes it considerably less reliable when taking shots at longer ranges. As for the damage drop, I didn't really notice much difference. If you can land your shots, it'll still kill just as quick as it used to. However, all of the increased recoil kind of ruined this gun for me, so it's gonna go in a C tier. Next up is the FFAR. Now, this thing also used to be the meta all the way back when it was introduced in Season 2. It's been through its own fair share of nerfs, having gotten hit with a fairly sizable one at the beginning of Season 3. Its headshot multiplier was decreased, its maximum damage was decreased, its minimum damage was decreased, and its maximum damage range was decreased. The only thing that got buffed about this gun was the neck multiplier went slightly up from 1 to 1.2. Now, while all that might seem like a lot, in the context of the game, it really doesn't feel like a lot. This thing definitely has the fire rate to make up for the decreased damage, and if you set it up right, it still absolutely destroys at close to mid-range encounters. It definitely struggles a bit at long range, but you really shouldn't be pushing those encounters with this type of gun anyway. For that, I'm going to give this gun a B tier. It's still very viable, but it does get outshined a little bit by some of the other competitors. Next up is another past meta gun, the CR56 AMAX. The AMAX had its time to shine as the meta throughout Season 1 and then again in Season 3, thanks to its high damage rate and decent accuracy. It has a bit more recoil than a lot of the other meta weapons, but given that its recoil pattern is pretty much just vertical, it's not that hard to compensate for. The update didn't really do much to change this gun. Its headshot multiplier increased a little bit, and its torso multiplier decreased a little bit, but that really didn't make much of a difference. All in all, this thing absolutely shreds. It plays just like I remember it in Season 3. It deals great damage, has excellent range, and all in all is just a super reliable choice for an assault rifle. The AMAX is going to get the first A tier ranking on the list. It's not quite perfect, as it still does have quite a bit of recoil and can't really handle itself at close range, but other than that, it's a great choice. Next up is the QBZ. This is a gun that has pretty much flown under the radar since it was added with the Cold War integration in Season 2. And honestly, the best way to describe this is, it's fine. There's nothing really special about it like a lot of the other guns. It has a fair amount of recoil, but decent damage and movement speed. If you have the skill, you can definitely make great plays with this gun, but it doesn't really excel in any one particular category. That is, there's not much that it can do that something else can't do better. For that reason, I'm gonna give this a C tier because it pretty much falls right in the middle of the pack. It could be better, but it could also be a lot worse. Next up is the FAL, which is the only semi-auto assault rifle in Warzone. I had heard that this gun played pretty well in Season 1. Personally, I had never used it because semi-auto weapons never really appealed to me or my playstyle. And honestly, this gun is kind of trash. I think it really became useless when all of the tactical rifles were added in Season 2. And even though all of those have been nerfed at this point, so they're not as broken as they were, they're still all more effective than the FAL. It has quite a bit of recoil, so hitting consecutive shots, especially headshots, is hard to do at any sort of range. And the overall damage is so low that the time to kill is absolutely terrible. Final verdict on this one, you could definitely still use it if you had to, but there's definitely better options out there in the form of the Cold War attack rifles. So I'm gonna give this an E tier. Next we have the ASVAL. This is a gun that was never really in the meta and wasn't really talked about that much. And I think the biggest reason for that is because of its small mag size and high recoil. Basically, this is a gun that plays more like an SMG than an AR. It has great damage, but a shorter damage range, and has a lot more recoil than the steadier AR counterparts. This was a difficult one for me to place because the gun itself does have some great attributes about it. But I feel like it's kind of in the same boat as the FAL in that there's other guns that can do what the ASVAL can do, just better. The biggest problem I see with the ASVAL is the small mag size. You can only fit 30 rounds max, which is fine if you're only fighting one person, but the second you start pushing duos or trios, you're gonna run out of bullets pretty quick. I'm gonna give the ASVAL a D tier. It's a decent gun, and if you just like it, there's no reason you can't play with it, but I just personally think there's better options out there. Next up, we have the XM4, which had kind of been competing with the Pharah for the meta pre-nerf. Like the Pharah, this gun also had some big changes made to it. Both its maximum and minimum damages were decreased, its ADS speed was also decreased, and its recoil was increased a bit. But unlike the Pharah, I don't think those changes made that much of a difference. Honestly, this thing still beams pretty well from range. I don't have much to say about this one other than it does everything right. It's pretty much your decent standard AR, not too much recoil, excellent damage range, and excellent bullet velocity, all while packing some pretty decent movement speed. It does get outpaced a little bit by some of the other guns on this list, like the AMAX, which just does more damage overall, so I'm only going to give this gun a B tier, but it's still pretty good. Next up is the M4A1, which is basically just the Modern Warfare version of the XM4. I figured the M4 and the XM4 would be pretty similar, but I was kind of disappointed with the way the M4 played. It's definitely a lot slower overall. It doesn't have the same movement speed abilities that you get from the XM4. The one thing it does have going for it is you can absolutely destroy at super long ranges with this gun, but any other range, it's kind of disappointing. This is another gun that's not necessarily bad, but there's just better options at this point. And if you're trying to go head to head against somebody running the XM4 or the AMAX, you're going to get outgunned. For that reason, I'm going to give the M4A1 a C tier. Finally, we get to the gun I know you all have been waiting for, the Krig 6. Now, this gun is definitely the meta of Season 4 Reloaded. It's got great bullet range, great bullet velocity, insanely fast ADS time and movement speed, and great overall damage. Basically, it just excels at everything that it does. In fact, it was one of the few guns that actually got buffed during the Reloaded update. The changes are subtle, but it did get a minimum damage increase from 25 to 26. which when added to the great stats that this gun already had, made this gun an absolute beast. Obviously, since this thing is the meta, there really isn't any other better option out there when it comes to assault rifles, so this gun is going right into S tier. Finally, we come to the very last gun on the list, which is the Ram 7. Now, the Ram never really reached meta status like a lot of the other guns did, but during Season 3, it was definitely a competitor with the AMAX. And even now, after it got a slight nerf from the update, it still is absolutely 100% viable. This is another gun that's just a really reliable choice. It's got great damage and great range. A little bit of recoil, but nothing that's not too hard to control. Personally, I use this gun a lot during Season 3, and I'm really glad that it's one of the more viable choices again. I wouldn't say it's better than the Krig, because nothing is, but it's definitely up there. I'm gonna put the Ram 7 in A tier alongside the AMAX. I think both guns are pretty equal at this point, with the AMAX benefiting a lot more from longer range and the Ram 7 benefiting a little bit more from shorter range. But at the end of the day, they're both still great options to choose from. That's going to do it for this video. I'll be back soon with part 2, where I will go over the other 11 guns that we didn't get to in this video. So make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss that. But anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up and comment which of these assault rifles is your go-to weapon. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.